Hey everyone, welcome back to a Liftoff PM Product Manager Interview Guide. So in this video, we're going to talk about the interview process on the Google Cloud Product Manager role. My name is Kevin Wei. I'm a Senior PM. If you've been watching our videos, you know that we have lots of free interview prep lessons on this channel. Feel free to check them out, like our videos on measuring success, as well as how to answer some product sense and product strategy questions. And if you're enjoying them, you're going to want to level up your interview prep. You can click the join button below to get our complete Liftoff PM interview course. It has the same kind of content you see in our free lessons, the same kind of content that I share in private coaching. But the reason we're here today is to talk about the Google Cloud PM interview role. And joining us is Max. Max is a former PM at Google Cloud. Max, do you want to give a brief intro about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me. First of all, I would say that I benefited a lot from some earlier videos that Kevin put together a few years ago. It was extremely helpful for me when I was trying to get a PM role at Google. So thanks for everything that you are doing. Now, in terms of my introduction, I started my career actually as an investment banker after college, and then I worked in private equity for a few years. And then I did a business school. So I got a summer internship at Google. Initially, I was part of the finance team. It was called Technical Infrastructure Finance. And my job was to figure out what's the ROI on Google's investments in machine learning hardware, which was kind of a fascinating question to think about, right? And the scale of investments wasn't as huge as it is right now, but it was still like billions of dollars. And, for me as a former investment banker and private equity investor, that was like really fun and interesting. Then I went back to my school after the internship, finished my degree, and then when I joined full time during COVID, I was still part of the finance team, but I quickly realized that I wanted to be a product manager because I wanted to be closer to the business decision-making process and being able to figure out product strategy, work with customers, and sort of holistically acting as a mini owner of a specific product. That was something that I started, really thinking of, and was trying to figure out a path how I can become a PM. And so after like 9 or so months at Google, I converted into a product management role. I joined a relatively small team. Back then, it was just like a couple of PMs that were trying to figure out how to monetize or how to make cloud TPU commercially successful. So TPU is Google's own proprietary ML infrastructure, ML chips, something that NVIDIA is doing, and many people obviously know about NVIDIA and GPUs these days. Not that many people know that Google has its own architecture, own infrastructure. And so as a PM, my job was to figure out how to make it successful and how to make sure that this infrastructure is used by external labs, external companies that can do ML training and ML inference on TPUs. So I did that for about 4 years. And then I joined an early stage startup, also building chips, because before that, I never had startup experience. And I realized that I really want to work on something like more like early stage. And now I'm launching my own company.
Very exciting, Max. And thanks for taking time out of your busy day to call us in your Tesla Cybertruck. So thanks for joining. I know you have a very busy schedule. So let's just get right into it. I know that you were at Google, you transitioned into a Google Cloud PM role. You ended up being an interviewer where you interviewed a lot of people for the Google Cloud PM role. So I think it's great to have you here on as a guest for this video. Maybe we can start by just discussing like what are some things that you think Google Cloud hiring managers are looking for?
Yeah, well, great question. And things are changing constantly. The only constant is change, right? So, as I mentioned, I left Google like last year, and my experience may not be completely, and my knowledge may not be completely up to date. But I think it's obvious that the company, as like many other companies, are evolving, and there is more and more emphasis on AI, right? And AI is becoming part of like pretty much every product, both on consumer side of Google's business, but also on enterprise side, which is Google Cloud. And so I will not be surprised that anyone preparing for pretty much any PM role should keep in mind, like, okay, how AI is affecting that specific product, whether it's like databases or things like, virtual machines or storage or like pretty much anything, right? Because that's most of the growth is coming from sort of AI use cases. At the same time, though, it's important to just like think holistically, like, okay, what this business is about. And it's very different from, consumer products where think about UX design, you think about, like your personas. In enterprise business, you still need to think who are your target audience and target customers, but you kind of need to understand that this is just a different nature of the business, and you need to be a little more up-leveled and strategic and think about an ecosystem of like different kinds of like cloud products that GCP has in its portfolio. So I don't know if I answered your your question, but that's like just some high-level thoughts.
No, for sure. I think those are just some like really relevant trends and things to keep in mind. Getting a little bit more specific, are there any sort of example interview questions that someone might want to prepare for when they're preparing for their Google Cloud PM interview?
Sure. I think depending on the type of the interview, right? Like it could be like a little more technical or strategic, like or analytical interview. And I think Google Cloud is trying to adhere to the overall Google approach, right? Like with like 3 or 4 different types of interviews, and it could be the same interviewers, but they may be wearing different hats depending on what exactly they're trying to assess. Um, I would say, though, that one thing that comes up pretty much in any interview is like cross-functional management. And that's kind of a behavioral question, right? Like, give me an example of, when you worked with a bunch of stakeholders and you, as a PM or whatever role you had, how did you drive consensus? How did you get things done? Google has many acronyms, and one of the most popular acronyms I feel like is XFN, which stands for cross-functional kind of alignment or cross-functional collaboration. And so I will not be surprised if like that's the question that the candidate would get for sure, maybe even a couple of times. So having like a few examples, I think, is useful. And then also, I think there is more and more emphasis on trying to find people with like really relevant background. Like, for example, when we were interviewing candidates for ML infrastructure roles, right? Like for my team, Cloud TPU team, or some sister teams like Cloud GPU, for example, people were looking for either experience of building infrastructure products or experience of using infrastructure products, right? Because there are some companies that are not necessarily building chips, but like using them for, different kinds of software applications or consumer applications that they're building on top of infrastructure by like training their models or like open sourcing by serving open source models or doing inference of open source models. And so having some stories that are relevant for the specific product team that you are interviewing for is very, very important as well.
Makes sense. And I know that one of the things that Google Cloud specifically asks interviewers is, people going through the Google Cloud interview process, they'll go through the standard Google PM interview process where you get asked about product insights and analytical questions, like how would you measure success for this? Or like if this metric is down, what do you do, right? The classic
Yep.
PM interview questions. But there's also the kind of domain interview where you're talking to an actual Google Cloud PM. So Max, I'd love to know, like, what are just some concepts or knowledge that someone might want to prepare for in this like Google Cloud domain specific interview?
Sure. I can share a specific question that I really liked asking the candidates. And, this question was just like very practical, like for me as an infrastructure PM, because I was dealing with this problem all the time. And the question was, how would you think about forecasting capacity? for, let's say, ML chips like TPUs, right? Because this is this is a huge problem for many companies and even governments, right? Like many people probably heard about Project Stargate. It's not Google's project. It's OpenAI is building a massive cluster of like $500 billion worth of chips in Texas, like with a few other companies. Why is it 500 billion? Why it's not a trillion or like 100 billion, right? Like how you should think about the demand for your product, right? Like, and how can you assess sort of what's happening in the economy more broadly and what's happening in like specific verticals. So I love this question because it touches upon like multiple pieces, right? Like it's supply and demand, how you can match those things, how you can think about go-to-market strategy. And it's very open-ended because like some candidates were like doing bottom-up analysis, trying to think like, oh, how many tokens do you need to serve Llama 70B? And, like how many people are using those tokens for what kinds of applications, and you kind of build your projection bottom up. Or some people were just saying like, oh, I know that Nvidia has like whatever $100 billion worth of revenue, and maybe Google is like player number two in this market, and so they were like just approaching it more from like investor perspective, like the way I guess like hedge fund investors or public equity investors would approach this. And then sometimes we would go into like specific engineering questions, like, okay, tell me what you know about ML hardware. And I was not necessarily looking for someone with like a lot of expertise in like how chips are being made, and what's the difference between BF16 or FP8 precision and TFLOPs, and why the TFLOP count is different. If the candidate knew this information, that would be a plus, but I was not necessarily looking for that. I was just trying to assess sort of intellectual approach, right? And how people can think on the ground about those kinds of questions. And I will not be surprised if other PMs like that are working on other products would be also thinking about questions that they are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes we were looking for people with like specific background or insights in that specific domain. But more often than not, it's just like intellectual curiosity and like, being able to like ask the right questions and then get to a certain answer, which doesn't have to be precise, but you need to show your thinking process. So
Awesome. And yeah, I know that like as a interv or as a candidate, you have the opportunity to select what domain you're going for, right? So it could be anything from like storage to security to what you're working on, Max. So is it fair also for interviewers to ask about, kind of like you mentioned, if Google is looking for someone with a specific knowledge, is it fair
mhm.
for the interviewer to ask you like, hey, tell me more about this project that you have on your resume? Can you go deep into it? Can you tell me about the trade-offs that you made? Can you tell me just a little bit more about this thing that you have on your resume? Is that something Google interviewers might ask about also?
This is a very good question. And in my experience, both going through this process myself and doing some of these interviews, people are not necessarily looking at resumes as much. I think in other companies, like when I was like interviewing for like startup roles, people tend we're looking at specific experiences more often than not. I feel like maybe this is unique to Google, maybe like other big tech companies doing it in a similar way, but sometimes people do not even look at resumes at all. Like they see the candidate introduces themselves, and then people start asking questions, like whatever questions they already had in mind. And there are pros and cons of that approach. Honestly, I was more on the side of like, even if I haven't looked at the resume, because sometimes like recruiters forget to attach it to to the invitation or whatever, or maybe I just don't have enough time. But when people mentioned in their introduction what they worked on, I would definitely ask at least one or two questions just to learn more, right? Like out of my own curiosity and just to see how people present their work. But again, like it depends, and there's not necessarily a requirement. There's no requirement to dive deep into, specific bullet points in a resume of a candidate, if that makes sense.
Okay, so yeah, it sounds like it's a little bit more general where they'll ask you like kind of like a quote unquote case question. Here's the problem. How would you go about solving it?
Exactly, exactly. And I think the rationale for that, sorry, just to add a bit more context, is that recruiters are supposed to already do a good job of like understanding the experience of the candidate and whether they're like good enough for Google based on their merits, their like professional background, educational background, etc. So uh, one thing that I also found surprising, you didn't ask about this, but like in terms of like education, I never heard anyone asking me anything about my business school or where I went to college. Like people really don't care about this stuff for what it's worth. And it's a good news or and a bad news at the same time, like for the candidates. Anyway, that's one of the surprising things that I learned throughout being a PM at Google.
Yeah, I think I've seen the same thing where no, in my experience, not even just at Google, just anywhere,
Hmm.
I haven't really been asked about my education background either. I know that in the domain interview, right, since it's like very general and since it's very like case heavy, candidates probably want to brush up on some of their knowledge. Do you have any
Yeah.
recommendations or like resources that candidates can use as they prepare for like, brushing up on their domain knowledge?
Yeah, I personally found Google Cloud Digital Leader course to be helpful. I discovered it after I already went through the interview process and became a PM. Uh, and I did it actually over Thanksgiving's break a couple of years ago. I found it to be relatively easy, even for non-technical audience, but comprehensive enough because it gives you a glimpse into Google Cloud and what are the types of the products that are available for GCP customers. Um, it touches upon like use cases, like what customers are actually building on top of Google Cloud, right? And it can be taken in like a couple of days. Like maybe I spend, I don't know, 10 hours or 12 hours collectively preparing for the test, and then you take this test, and you can even get a certificate. Like you can put it on your LinkedIn, on your resume, which is another nice to have feature. So I highly recommend that thing, and maybe you can add a link for folks if they want to check it out. Um, Another thing that I found useful is actually classic system design interview, right? Because if you think like about like system design of Instagram or system design of WhatsApp or YouTube or whatever, like consumer product, you need to think about things like database, things like optimizing for like certain number of users, how you would scale this product, right? Or obviously things like LLM, how you can connect a foundation model, this kind of knowledge of like system design is very transferable to the cloud domain interview because most of those products are built on cloud. Yes, some companies have their own on-prem infrastructure, but most companies these days are using one or several hyperscale or several clouds, right? And the final thing I would say is just being good at knowing the cloud stack of your own product, right? Like whatever the candidate is working on, even if it's not necessarily product management, right? Like let's say you work at a commercial bank in some strategy role or whatever. Just thinking like, okay, what your bank is doing with their infrastructure, right? Like with, AWS or GCP or whatever they are using or on-prem, how they perform their own business and how it's organized on the back end. Just like thinking about that, I think would be also a good step in terms of like preparing for that interview.
Very helpful. So yeah, for the viewer, again, just to refresh, right? Like you're gonna go through a few rounds of talking to Google PMs. Maybe like three of them will be like general Google PM sort of like interview questions, but then the two other ones will probably be like specific to the Google Cloud domain that you've chosen. So that's where a lot of this advice will be helpful in your prep. Let's fast forward. I think like this is really good. This has been really good advice so far. So let's fast forward and say that you have gotten your offer for your Google Cloud PM role, Max. And I'm curious, from your perspective, do you want to just speak a little bit on like the what it's like working as a Google Cloud PM and maybe some of the pros and cons of working in this org?
Sure. Well, one thing that I would mention is these days at any big company, including Google. there are some considerations about like optimizing the headcount, etc., right? And thinking which areas should be prioritized versus not. And at least when I was at GCP, and I think it's still the case, it's considered to be a growth area for Alphabet, because it's growing like at whatever, like 35% year over year. And it's good news for a PM, right? Like, because if you join a certain product, there is high likelihood that there's going to be a double digit growth and you can be part of it. Now, like obviously there are hundreds of products or maybe thousands, I don't know. Like when Google announces like Google Cloud Conference, usually like there's like a blog post about like 123 products being launched at the same day. And I don't have a view like what's the total count of products, but it's a lot. And so depending on where you end up, if you join GCP, it may be more or less interesting, both from your personal perspective and from a perspective of like what's the demand, right, like right now in the economy, in the enterprise sector. But I would say another good thing about Google Cloud is just there is some horizontal flexibility. So like there are examples of people who are like joining one team and then they're like converting or then like moving to another team, depending on again like growth priorities of the business, but also personal passions. That's a nice thing. And finally, I oftentimes heard criticism that Google Cloud is very different from Google in terms of culture, and it's much less googly or more aggressive or less fun. I didn't find this to be true necessarily. I mean, I didn't work in other parts of Alphabet. At some point, I was part of a core ML organization, which wasn't in Google Cloud. It was just like a separate part of Alphabet reporting to a senior VP who is like head of core. But I didn't necessarily find that to be true. I would say it's more of a myth in my personal experience. So folks were like really nice with like very different backgrounds. But now, if I would emphasize like some areas for improvement or things that I was missing a little bit, sometimes it was kind of a mission. Like, what is our mission? What are we optimizing for, right? And like Google's mission statement is like to organize world's information and make it universally useful and accessible. And but for GCP, I'm not even sure what's the mission, like what's the mission statement. I think at some point it was like drive digital transformation for the world or something about digital transformation. So it did not necessarily resonate with me, and I'm not sure if it resonated with other people. So for my specific product, I was trying to set up our own mission, which I kind of tied to Google's, corporate mission. And for Cloud TPU, it was like to make this Cloud TPU infrastructure universally useful and accessible. Um, then at some point, I thought that it would be nice to maybe tie it to AGI, and that's the way like OpenAI and Anthropic, the two companies that I respect a lot, and Anthropic used to be our customer. They have a mission around like building safe AGI for humanity, which kind of resonates with me as well. And I think it resonates broadly with Google Cloud and other cloud providers. But I think they're like maybe less interested in like using AGI as a sort of a goal, right? Like, and it's kind of a philosophical topic by itself. And what's the definition of AGI? What to do if we get there, right? So that could be a fun topic for a separate discussion, and it could also be an interesting interview question, actually. But anyway, I felt sometimes like that was missing a little bit. And then there's things of like any big tech company, just like misalignment or different incentives for different VPs or different directors, a little bit of empire building, a little bit of what I call bureaucratic frisbee when there's no progress. There's like a meeting with 100 people and people are throwing some random ideas, but like there is really no progress out of that, and like it's just like a bunch of bureaucracy. So but yeah, I think the company has gotten better though over time, and the leadership, like Thomas Kurian, I think he's doing a good job at organizing everyone and like delivering results, and I think financially Google Cloud has been doing like pretty well.
Sweet. Well, thanks, Max, for your in-depth analysis there and reflection on your time there as a PM at Google Cloud. I think it's like definitely very like a breath of fresh air to hear like the genuine thoughts of you, probably especially because you're no longer a PM there at Google Cloud. But Max, we wish you the best in your journey as a founder. Definitely keep us updated. Maybe you can come back in a few years and you can leave a comment in the comment section. Let us know how things are going. We wish you the
Absolutely.
best. And for the viewers who are watching at home, good luck with any upcoming Google Cloud PM interviews you have. At Liftoff PM, we have a lot of free interview prep videos on our channel, so definitely take a look at our lessons. Hopefully, they're helpful for you. And good luck with your upcoming interviews.
Yeah, and just final thing, thank you so much for having me. And I will be hiring PMs for sure for my startup later this year. So hopefully we can have another conversation. And feel free to sign up to my LinkedIn or X account if you want to stay in touch. And best of luck to everyone. And thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. We'll have links to Max's socials down below, and whenever Max is hiring, he will have a post about that on his X accounts.
Absolutely.